Live from the Bronx, Season 2. We are still the podcast that celebrates Bronx creators and change makers, and I'm your boy, KB.
What is going on, beautiful people? It is your boy, Jay. And before we jump into this episode, y'all already know what to do. We are streaming across all platforms. Go hit that subscribe button to stay up to date with everything that we have going on. And y'all know the saying, tell a friend to check us out. So, we have a very, very exciting episode for you all. I need you guys to understand how special this episode is, because if it wasn't for these two folks who are going to be our guests for today's episode, Live from the Bronx would not be here. I need you to understand that. So I'm not going to take too much time up. I want to introduce these guys. You're going to get a chance to know some really amazing folks who are staples in the Bronx. Without further ado, please join me in a virtual round of applause in joining the co-founders of the DreamYard organization, both Tim Lord and Jason Duchin.
Hey guys, thanks for having us. This is exciting.
How are you guys doing?
Doing great.
Swimming through COVID, Jason. Swimming through COVID right now.
Tell me about it, man. COVID has been something else. I'm glad we are hopefully on our way out of this. Keeping our fingers crossed.
Light at the end of the tunnel. It's a good feeling.
So like Jason said, we owe you gentlemen a huge debt of gratitude. Before a lot of this, we did not know a ton about podcasting and equipment, so we definitely got to learn that at DreamYard. So before we get to that stuff, let's kind of go backward, right? We want to learn about the two of you guys. So I guess, Tim, who are you? Jason, who are you? How do you gentlemen identify? And we leave that question super vague on purpose because all of us bring a lot of identities to the table. So how do you guys identify?
So I'll jump out. I am a white man who grew up with a lot of privilege. And, you know, that shaped my life in incredible ways, Kevin. I grew up going to private schools, all over the country. My dad and mom moved around a lot for education and for stuff they were doing. I went to, college at Brown University and got into acting and went to San Francisco and studied acting and theater and started to find my path when I started to connect to my creative voice. I think it allowed me to see that there was a world out there where I could make choices and I could feel like my voice could make a difference in the world. And when we first started DreamYard, I think I was on some instinctive level feeling like the world that was paved for me was based on inequity and injustice. I didn't know what to do about that. But I think there was a seed there. And now I've been able to move to a place where I can really own the identities that I was privileged with and hopefully put them to use and to service of making a difference in the world. So that's a little bit about how I would talk about my identities before I toss it over to Jason.
So my identities, it's such a, it's this evolving thing, right? It's like, one of those things like with identities, I feel in today's world, as you begin to know, like it's this ongoing journey to get to know yourself, right? Like your eyes open up, your heart opens up, your mind opens up, and you begin to know more and more about yourself as you grow, depending on your willingness to open yourself up to the information and learning and knowledge and other people that you run into. So I'm a man, I'm a white man, I'm a white Jewish man. I'm a believer in anti-racism. I'm a believer in alternative forms to commerce other than capitalism. I'm a believer in level playing fields. I believe that we all like that there is nothing that separates us into from the grace and the talent that we're born with, but it's a question of who has access to the opportunities and the privilege to make use of that grace and that talent that we've been given. And so I think one of the things that has always interested me about DreamYard. And it's funny, like, listen to you guys at the top of this, like you guys are saying, like, how grateful you are for DreamYard we are giving you the space so you can learn, about podcasting and develop the technical skills and all that. Man, like I turn right back to you. It's like, I'm so grateful that you're using our space to bring your voice, that you are creating a venue like this where you can bring the Bronx and the many voices of the Bronx out into the community and out into the world. And for me, like in terms of how I identify myself, it's like I'm a bridge builder. I'm a gatekeeper, and it's my job to keep the gate open and keep the bridge flowing and do everything I can with, whatever access to power, to privilege, to opportunity I have to make sure that those amongst us who don't have access to the bridges leading to opportunity have the access that they need to thrive and flourish. And so for me, like I'm following you guys, man. I'm waiting for you guys to lead me to the unimaginable places of not only self-discovery, but the beauty that the Bronx can be. So I'm privileged and happy to be here with you.
I love that. Thank you so much for being vulnerable in this conversation, right, already, and sharing parts of who you are. Jason, one of the things that you mentioned that I think is super important to think about is the interrogation of our own identities on a continuous basis, right? We're always trying to explore who we are. We're always learning about ourselves and our identities and how we show up. So I think it's really important for folks to understand and hear that, right? So although you kind of subtly said that and continued on, it's an important piece to call out. So with all of that said, what is your relationship? How do you and Tim know each other, and what brought you together to do this work?
So I'll start on this one. We can just rotate back and forth. So Tim and I, we can see how far we want to go with this. So Tim and I, we knew each other in high school, right? And I think we had different paths through high school. We both went to the same high school. I was in a lot of trouble really young, which I think, Jason, I know you well enough, you can relate to a little bit. But it's like, it's just, I was a knucklehead. I did stupid things. I got into things that I shouldn't have, that I on reflection, I wish I hadn't. And so our paths never really crossed in high school. We're different grades and led somewhat different lives. And when I sort of re-met Tim again, and we were never really friends in high school. I mean, we knew each other, but we were never really friends. But then I met Tim in New York City because his uncle pulled a bunch of artists together to talk, and his uncle did some work out in France, in Paris, and was building some center there and he wanted to be that center where artists from around the world came. And so he wanted to talk to artists who were doing work in New York City. And so we both sort of found ourselves around a table together where I was invited to join in the conversation. At the time I was acting and writing in New York City, and Tim and I just gelled. We were talking about stuff, I think there was this divine sort of dissatisfaction with the limitations of the impositions of the artistic sort of art as commerce in New York City. The big deal is to try to get a commercial or go out to California, and that's when you got it made. When it's actually the thing that drew me most to the art was actually the story and the connection, the communion with other human beings. And that was so different than what, the direction of art as commerce. And so I think Tim and I both, it felt like we both sort of felt that. And so that's how we sort of reconnected, and I think then began a friendship that we didn't have in high school, but then began, some years after we left college and reconnected in New York City in really a conversation about the art with his uncle.
So you guys weren't really friends in high school, reconnected in adult life, realized had similar kind of ideas and values. So I guess for the listeners, so what exactly is DreamYard, right? What is the foundation, right? What's the mission? What are you guys looking to do? And why did you select the Bronx for DreamYard of all the places in the world that you could have had this organization?
That's a great question, and it actually beautifully picks up sort of where Jason left off his story, because one of the things that was really amazing about that time that we reconnected in New York, as Jason said, is that we had this seed, this desire to connect around story and community, and that the arts was so much more about what you what you build with other people. And 3 weeks later, we started teaching a class together at a community center. And the first day was a complete disaster. We thought we were just like walking in there and knew everything. There are some really funny stories, and somebody probably has video somewhere of the two of us just trying to manage our first 2-hour class. But we loved it. You know, the energy of creating together with young people, of getting to know them, of their humor and their take on the world was inspiring. We stuck it out, and we worked with this group of young people for over a year, and we wrote a play with them called DreamYard. And it was about a place that young people could go and adults had forgotten how to get there. And they could go anywhere, be anyone, or do anything that they wanted. And I think there was a day that I think if I look back on it, I could feel the path of my life starting to change, which was there was a girl in the class who was about 12, who the guy who ran the after school program said had shown no real interest in education and reading and writing, was like disconnected from it. And you guys will understand the reason why when I tell you what happened on this particular day. She came to us and she had written an entire scene for the DreamYard play that was based on the life of her grandmother, who had been an artist in Harlem during the Harlem Renaissance period. And she had done research and she'd interviewed people and she turned it into a scene for the play, and she was on fire. And I didn't know then, because we hadn't learned the anti-racist work, the social justice education work. We didn't know what the names were. Nobody had given us that in the upbringing that certainly that I had. Nobody had taught me these things. But the seed was, here's a young woman whose culture and community is being celebrated by the work that she's writing. She has a platform to share that with others, and then to take it out in community that talks about the beauty of her community, the beauty of her culture, the beauty of her family's story and history. And she owns her story and is connecting it to education. That was the real seeds of DreamYard. And there was, 12 kids in the program, in that class with us, who were creating this piece. And when they performed the piece, we and they invited their parents and teachers and people came up to us afterwards and said, we don't have anything like this in the public schools in New York. This was back in 92 or 93. Would you guys come do this in schools? And so that was the seed. That was the beginning. How we got to the Bronx is actually a really great and very interesting, important story. But I just wanted to share with you sort of the seed of where DreamYard came from.
Yeah, and the Bronx, I mean, the Bronx invited us. Like the Bronx reached out and grabbed us and said, come here, right? And it's like, and there's personal attachments to the Bronx. Like my family Jews come over from Europe, escaping, some of the horrors that was going on there in Germany and Russia, and like many others, Jews, they settled in the Bronx. And so I certainly knew the Bronx, but I didn't have, so I wouldn't call it an emotional attachment, because by the time I was growing up, I mean, I still have family that lives in the Bronx, but a lot of my family sort of begin to disperse throughout the rest of the city. But how the Bronx reached out to us was, there's this great woman named Irma Zordoya who is the superintendent. And she came and reached out to us and said, listen, I want you all, and this is at the time, like we had DreamYard programs in all the boroughs, and in Brooklyn and in Manhattan and Queens, and, even up in Westchester, opened up a DreamYard in LA. And we were thinking, like, DreamYard's going to be, something that like happens around the world, like the arts version of McDonald's, franchises everywhere, DreamYard Big Macs. And Irma said, listen, man, he's like, we want you to dig deep with our community. Like in the Bronx, we don't, like, our kids don't have access to some of the things that are just across the river in Manhattan. And you guys, the work that you do, and the work that you do with story, and the work that you do with actors and musicians and dancers and poets, like, we want you to dig deep with our school system, and we want to work with you to tell the stories that are happening in our classrooms, and we want you to travel that with us, and we want you to open up a school here in the Bronx, and we want you to make the Bronx your home. And it was like one of those things, it was such an emotional and raw just ask to, like, come join our family. You know what I mean? And so I think it then began this investigation where we pulled together our board, we pulled together a bunch of advisors, and we realized that the thing that made us all the most excited, and all that like the small DreamYard community at the time, was the idea of being able to sit with other people and engage in a communion of intellect, of spirit, of body, where we tell stories, where we build bridges to each other, to each other's identities, genders, races, and that we begin to create a place where you can have a democratic town square where all of our stories are valuable. And so this great woman, Irma Zordoya, gathered together a number of principals and schools and really allowed us to have a conversation with schools, with our artists, with our teachers. And that's how it was born. And we literally, Tim and I went back to our board and we're like, we're shutting everything down but our work in the Bronx. And we're going to go deep there. And we're going to listen there. And we're going to engage with our families that we work with in the Bronx, with the teachers, with the children. And we're going to ask them the question of how can we be used as a tool for your pursuits in education, your pursuits in artistry. And we want to engage with you as collaborators, as explorers, as examiners, and let's see where it takes us. And so we really came in with that type of an open posture, and we were received, we were embraced. And this is about, I want to say about 20 years ago or so, right? And that's how it began. And we shut everything down, opened up a school in the Bronx, opened up our community center in the Bronx, and that's been our home.
Just to pick up on what Jason said, one of the things that I think about all the time, too, when that invitation was happening, was we had already started working with some schools in the Bronx, and the principals we worked with, and these were principals that Irma had supported and guided and helped sort of grow. They were the most fantastic educators. They were the ones who truly knew the role of the arts and social justice in building a community where young people's voice mattered outside of a standardized test. How this was a way to build community with parents and families and bring them into the school in ways that other ways might not, and other methods might not. And so we had these principals that were inviting us as well. The most fascinating thing about working with these principals was in the Bronx was that with their guidance and their commitment to the role of the arts in transforming school communities for parents and for kids, was that we realized that what we could be part of was building pathways. If we focused in this one community, if we work closely, and here's the thing that makes me most proud about our work is I can't tell you how many principals say, DreamYard doesn't come in and tell us what to do. You come in and say, here's what we can do. What do you need? How can we work together? What is it that we together can do for our young people, for our families? That's a really important approach to education and to being a partner in the schools. And so with that became this vision of building pathways, starting with kids as young as kindergarten coming to the Art Center, and recently thinking about how can the work of arts and social justice help a young person shape a vision, what's possible for their career. So all the pieces fit together once we came to the Bronx and had these partners that could push us and drive us and expect a lot from us.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
So I love that. Thank you for taking us through the journey of DreamYard and your journeys, right? And why we're all here today having this conversation. It's really exciting. Those of you who don't know, I am a product of DreamYard, right? And an alum. And I'm still connected, right? So I still do work with DreamYard. I get to see Tim and Jason, which is exciting. They know me since I was 14 years old in 9th grade. So they know my story. They've seen the craziness when I was in high school, and they're getting to see a whole other side of Jason as I'm growing up today. So it's exciting to bring this full circle. With all of that said, you guys are talking about the intersection of education, artistry, and social justice. Right. Sure. I'm sure I'm missing some pieces outside of that. But once you go to the DreamYard website, there's a pop-up box that comes up.
Yep.
And it's essentially your stance on anti-racism and social justice.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk to us a little bit more about that? Right. Because we often don't get a chance to see, in particular with organizations and nonprofits, folks be this explicit about their stance and where they are. And oftentimes those who do feel that way are folks who are on the ground, the program staff, right? We don't get to hear from leaders oftentimes who are leading these organizations who are as connected to the community as it sounds like you guys are, right? So why is it so important for you to make sure that everyone around you knows that this is who you are, this is what you stand for, and this is how we're going to move forward as an org?
It's essential, Jason. There's nothing more essential right now. I mean, when you look, our country was, like we're going through some crazy times right now, right? I mean, we've got like this madman in our presidency who is, lighting the powder keg of historical racism in our streets. And so the thing that is more important than anything right now is to be able to stand up and take a stand for what is justice, and to acknowledge, especially as white people, right? And I'm speaking for myself, especially as white people, that we have benefited by so much of the historical work of people of color, and specifically Black people in this country. And that the things that we have are all built on the backs of others who did work in this country and were paid nothing for it. And even after all of that 400 years of slavery, it's like you then get into Jim Crow, and you get into the history and the legacy of this country of everything from redlining, no one of color being able to get a loan, not being able to go to school, not being able to vote, not being able to walk down the street without having a policeman pull you over and stop and frisk you. And it is time that, like, the mythology of this country, that you just pick yourself up by your bootstraps and it's hard work and everything's going to unroll before you, and it's like fucking, it's like the Aztecs and the streets are paved with gold, is just a myth. And it's a crippling myth that is injuring our country and injuring our children and injuring the minds and hearts of all of us as citizens. And so I think it's essential that corporations, regardless of whether it's a nonprofit or private, that we stand up and we acknowledge that we are no longer going to exist in a country that adheres to these types of norms and these types of prejudice and this type of behavior, because it sets an unrealistic and poisonous dynamic for our young people when they look out at the world and they question the position that they're in, whether it be a white person who sits on high with privilege and everything they have and access to the systems of power, or whether it be a person of color who wonders why they can't get a loan for their home, why they can't find access to a loan to find their way into a 4-year college or a 2-year college or a job, or the list goes on and on and on. And so I think it's incumbent upon all of us. And as a white person, I can say I feel it's really incumbent upon white people to stand up and say enough is enough. We're not going to play this game by these crazy rules anymore. It's time to reconstitute our country and create rules that are based on equity, on love, on kindness, equality, and opportunity for all, and real opportunity for all.
Oh, I was just going to say, building on what Jason said, and this might have been the question you were going to ask, Kevin, is, how did this work really begin and evolve and develop at DreamYard? And, undoing racism, undoing institutional racism and the internalized racial oppression and the internalized white supremacy that comes from that is lifelong work. And it's work that has to happen every day. It's got to happen with people individually and within institutions like a place like DreamYard. And the work has to start somewhere. And what was amazing for Jason and me was that when I had been in the Bronx for a while, and it was actually after we'd founded DreamYard Prep, we started stumbling around the idea of social justice and racial equity, but having never been taught that, white men of privilege, we have huge blind spots. We were working with a number of really powerful Black educators, Black women. Renee Watson, who is the Director of Professional Development at DreamYard, is now an author, an incredibly successful, phenomenal young adult author. Amma Kojo, who's a poet now and still works with us, was the Director of Professional Development at the DreamYard Art Center. And Robin Walker Murphy, who's now the Executive Director of Groundswell in Brooklyn. You are two white men leading an organization that works predominantly, almost exclusively with young people of color in the Bronx. You need to begin to do anti-racist work. You need to begin to do the work, the identity work that we started this interview with, and understand why you're doing this work. And then that can be part of a conversation where DreamYard really develops a strong sense of who we are as an organization, as an anti-racist organization, as a social justice organization. And it began a journey which, I'm telling you, it has changed my life in ways that I am, unbelievably grateful for, because I feel like I can now be part of being in service of undoing institutional racism and doing the identity work. It restores all of our humanities, but it also leads to real change in the world. And so DreamYard, Jason and I began by doing undoing racism workshops. Now we do this work monthly as a staff at DreamYard. We don't have staff meetings anymore. We have what we call learning community, where we dig into anti-racist work, the history of it in the Bronx, institutional racism, redlining, really trying to come to grips with identity, with internalized oppression, with internalized superiority, and unpack all that. And that led to the place where we as a community could really work together, lean into that difficult work and those difficult conversations around crafting a statement that we could then put on the website and say, this is who we are. And that's fundamental, right? Because now the board knows, all of our donors know, everybody knows this is who we are.
So based on what you said, Tim and Jason, and thank you both for that, it sounds like at the core of who DreamYard is, this is what you've been doing. So I guess my question is, obviously in the last 4 years specifically, and Jason, you alluded to this, the administration that we've unfortunately been under, I can imagine this work has gotten more difficult in a lot of ways and a lot more challenging. So I guess, what has DreamYard's response been to that? What's it been like being a leader with everything that's been going on across the country during this time?
Can I just add something to that really quickly too? Because I do think, as you guys were talking about the work that you guys are doing around anti-racism, is the young people, and you guys not only just serve students, but you have families and the entire community who's involved with DreamYard. So in addition to Kevin's question, how are they receiving DreamYard, and how are they just dealing with all the social unrest that has been going on?
It's so interesting. So the thing that becomes really important in instances of governmental oppression, which is what we're in right now, is how do you maintain that dim flicker, that dim ember of hope, right? And because really right now, it's like the reality is this. It's like and just to get personal for just a second. So I remember when I was in college, I was arrested for something, and I was in jail, and I was in jail with a bunch of other black men, and I'd done something that was worse than many of the people in that jail, but I was the first to walk out, right? And I think the thing that is there's something about that, where the thing that I was amazed by is the reaction, I think, would be, I want to burn the joint down. I want to rip it apart, for the black man that was in there watching the white man just walk out. And I think the thing that is extraordinary to me today is, with the amount of oppression and the inequality that exists, is that the wave of protests that happened this past summer, that the country did not burn down to the ground, that the people took to the streets and said enough is enough, and that we want equality. We don't want revenge. We don't want to burn the joint down. We want equality. And so the thing that we have seen in DreamYard, just to build it back to the question that you're asking, Jason, with our young people, is how do we put our young people in a position where they can have a hopeful posture about their place in the future, and how they can feel that the future welcomes them and will embrace them, and that they can build the architecture of the most fantastical imaginings and constructions of what the future can be. And so I think about when Trump came in and issued the ban on Muslims, and made it so clear that the Muslim person, human being, was the other, was the enemy. What our artists and our educators did was they pulled together a community center which has so many families who are Muslim, and they led this beautiful parade through our streets in the Bronx, where our young people held signs and they said, not like, what they had every right to hold signs that said, "Fuck you, Trump," but instead they held signs that like, "We love you. We're human beings. We are Americans. Don't be afraid of us. Embrace us. Talk to us. Learn from us." Right? And so I think at the end of the day, the thing that is so powerful about the arts and about DreamYard and the work that we do in bringing that lens into our work is it puts young people in a position where they can harness the power of their vibrancy, of their ingenuity, of their innovation, and they can turn it to play as an invitation into our humanity. And so it puts them in a position where they can truly be the leaders that we all will follow tomorrow, as opposed to, and it takes huge power to not want to just rip the whole thing down and say, "The hell with y'all. You've beat us down too long and enough is enough." And that type of power on a community level that we have the privilege to be part of is what makes DreamYard, I think, so special and held in the community.
Yeah, I think that the story that Jason describes about the parade that was celebrating Muslim, not only the religion but culture and families and history. It points at some of the key pieces of our social justice pedagogy, which is our young people looking at the root causes of injustice. So you're taking a clear-eyed look at 400 years of institutional racism and inequity. You're also celebrating culture and community, as going back to the DreamYard story right from the beginning. But then, as Jason said, as artists, you are taking that and you as an artist are able to imagine a different future. Mm-hmm. Those are very powerful things because together they create some of what Jason is talking about. And what it leads to for us in terms of, get back to your question, Jason, about our families is, families with their young people getting to come to our poetry slam at Joe's Pub and celebrating the Bronx, celebrating this place that we live, turning that narrative around from that BS about like, this is a place with a history of, sure, we look at the root causes of why those things happened, but we don't dwell in that. We don't say that's all who we are. We then celebrate who we truly are and what we can be. And so, those poetry slams are, just as an example, I mean, it could be a theater performance or our Beat Yard, dropping an album. They're celebrations. They're community and family celebrations of sure, the hard things we've gone through, the hard things we still face, but they're also celebrations of who we are. And that's the response that we see, and it builds on itself. It builds on itself, and all of a sudden you have parents who are getting involved in our public works show and performing down, at the Delacorte Theater doing theater. It starts to get intergenerational, which is really, really amazing.
Yeah, and just one thing I would to add to that I think is really important in all this, right? We're not, the intention isn't, and this is sort of like, my own personal politics, but to bring it into bear, like the intention isn't to build a bunch of, pathway that is going to lead a bunch of, create the next brown and black group of capitalists that are going to go march in and occupy, Wall Street and the banks and just, and just repurpose the systems of oppression that already exist. Right? The intention is, how can we dig into ourselves and create something better that is really equitable, that is democratic, that is based on the promise of what democracy is? Like, what would it look to just rewrite the whole, damn constitutional Bill of Rights and center us all in it? Write it from the get-go with women central, with black people central, with brown people central, with indigenous people central. Right? And what does it mean to instead reimagine who we are and create the promise of what democracy really could be, rather than right now this thin slice of the vision of a bunch of guys from way back when who were landowners and white dudes and all that. But I think that's one of the beautiful things about DreamYard is it's not just saying like, oh, here, the door is open, go join this joint. No, it's like, how do we reimagine what that can be and create something that is truly beautiful and truly democratic and welcomes and loves us all?
Absolutely. So as you guys can all tell, right, it's specifically this is to the audience. As you're hearing Jason and Tim speak, you can see the passion behind the work that they do and their love and the love for the community that they have. And so as we are moving towards the celebration of community, the celebration of culture, the celebration of the Bronx and DreamYard, what are some of the most successful things that you've seen, right, with DreamYard? What are you excited about? What are you happy about? And where do you see DreamYard going in the next few years?
I'm not jipping. I mean, I think there's so much that's exciting. I think some of the work that we're doing, um, some of the racial equity work that we're doing that's coming into the schools. I mean, let's be real, right? It's like a lot of our educators and a lot of the adults that are young learners of color are exposed to are white folk, right? And there's this disconnect, there's this disharmony, and we're learning how can we embrace and love each other, right? And how can we learn from one another? And so I think some of the work that we're doing in educators of color going into public schools and working with public school teachers and administrators to create anti-racist liberated spaces. What does that look like? I think that's something that is a very important trajectory in motion of ours. Another one that I
Can
think—
I jump in, Jason?
Yeah, please do.
One of the things, just to pick up on that, is I could not agree more. I think it's one of the most exciting things. And I think, the move towards undoing racism, institutional racism, race equity, we move forward, we move back. What's really interesting after the reignition of the Black Lives Matter movement, at least in the sort of public consciousness after the George Floyd murders, is a lot of the educators that we work with in the Bronx that maybe felt like the system wasn't going to allow them to have those conversations and do that work. People are ready now. That's one of the things that I'm most hopeful about, is that we're in a place where I really believe that some of this work can truly, truly change collaboratively towards a place where you got an anti-racist curriculum and anti-racist education happening. And DreamYard is ready because of the work we've been doing over the last 10 years with a lot of people, obviously, besides Jason and me, this huge community of amazing educators. We're ready to pick up on that, just to try to disrupt your flow, Jason. I just wanted
No, you're right on. And I think, no, absolutely. And I think, Jason, I mean, one of the things that I think you'll recognize when I say it right away is I think one of the things that we're really interested in thinking about, and this is well beyond Tim and me, this is going to be the next wave of leaders at DreamYard and the next generation of people that make up DreamYard, is really reimagining what education is. Like what is a real freedom school look like in the Bronx today? What does it look like when our young children are not walking through metal detectors and that becomes the norm? What does it look like when school involves parents, involves grandparents, involves family members, when school isn't taking place in some concrete shell of a building, but is taking place in our parks and is taking place in our homes, is taking place in the minds and hearts of our citizenry, right? And so I think if we can begin to think about it in a collaborative form, why don't all kids in the Bronx have access to everything that technology has? Like in this time of pandemic right now, where we just need to enter you would get online, just have broadband. Why is it that 40% of our people don't have access to reliable bandwidth? Why is it that our kids are still struggling to get access to computers? Why is it that we're still struggling to get access to just the bare base to survive in perhaps the most apocalyptic times of our lives, right? And so it feels as though increasingly that despite the words, despite these movements that we're seeing happening around us, that the city still, in a time of high pressure and panic, turns away from communities of color. And so how can we say, you know what, next time we're going to make sure that we all have everything we need. We have the tools we need. We have the power we need. We have the resources we need. And we're not going to rely on the white institutions of power to make sure that we're healthy and whole, but that we're going to be able to build the expressions of our identity here. And we'll invite everyone in, man. It'll be a liberated, free space, but we're not going to rely on you to tell us what learning looks like, to tell us how much money you're giving us. Stop throwing us nickels when we need more than that, right? And so I think we're in a position now where we are ready to re-envision and reimagine the great power and promise and hope that education can really afford all of our citizens. And we can do that in the Bronx. And I think DreamYard wants to be part of that story.
Yeah, and so I mean, just on the sort of concrete space, we're continuing to think about this whole idea of pathways, and most recently we've been really investing in opportunities for the young people we work with to start to imagine how they can connect their passion for their voice, for the arts and social justice to careers by having the opportunity to learn through work as early as the ninth grade, not just busy work, but work that feels like it's making a difference in the community. And it's reimagining school, as Jason said. It's happening outside the walls of schools. It's happening where people are seeing the value of young people that they can bring to the community or to a business. But reimagining, as Jason said, not just plugging kids into the future of capitalism, but careers as being part of shaping who you are, right? Just like you guys, you have work that's meaningful to you. We want that for all of the young people that we work with. And so we've been doing that, connecting the work we do to that. We're also looking at, and probably in a couple of years, we're going to be launching an early childhood center, a DreamYard early childhood center. And with its an intersection of anti-racist, social justice, the arts, and environmental education for kids as early as 2, 3, 4 years old. And we're already doing a lot of that work at the Art Center, and it's just gorgeous to see. The parade that Jason described was an example of how social justice education can live in such a beautiful way with some of our youngest kids. And so we're doing all of that work. I think, and it's sort of the specific pieces, that's the programmatic pieces. I think the larger piece is something that Jason alluded to, which is, the Bronx is a place that is collaboratively right now responding to COVID. Oh, by the way, you can see my fingernails. My daughter painted them the other night.
I was going to ask you about those, man. I was going to wait till the end of the
my daughter Mary got bored and she wanted to try out some new designs, so I was the guinea pig. So the Bronx has responded to COVID in a pretty remarkable way. One of our board members, Derek Lewis, and his brother Desmond, and others, Michael Blake was one, and many others realized that the Bronx needed to come together collaboratively to respond to the crisis, and started something called the Bronx Community Relief Effort, which has now become the Bronx Community Foundation. And DreamYard is right involved in that partnership. And what it really is, and we can get into the details in a second if you guys would like, but what's really is, and it alludes to something Jason said, is it's a collaboration, a true collaboration amongst families, young people, leaders, Bronx nonprofits, to respond to this crisis, to this moment, and say, we're going to survive this. But even more, it's what are the things we can start to do together to thrive in the future. And that's really, it's really unique for people not to fight over the scraps, but to say, we're going to come together to support our own, to listen to each other, to follow each other's lead, and then to sort of say, how can we try to survive what is a very hard time in the Bronx right now? As you guys know, it is really, really tough for so many families that are essential workers, that have lost jobs, that have health crisis, that are housing crisis, that are food crisis, and trying to respond to that together, and then say, what can we put in place so that we can thrive in the future? It's going to be a model for the rest of the country, I'm telling you. And that's something that DreamYard just really is excited to be a part of.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for all of that. It's actually really inspiring to hear that, especially the nugget that you just left us with, Tim, in terms of like people coming together, especially in times of crisis, right? Because we've definitely seen like the opposite can happen. So this is remarkable. So we're definitely excited about all of the work. I learned a lot through this interview. Obviously, Jason grew up with DreamYard. I'm learning a lot tonight, so this was great.
Good with you, Jason. It's a real privilege and a pleasure being here with you and talking. It's great to meet you, Kevin. But it is. I've known you, Jason, for so long, and to be with such a powerful duo of the two of you leading this show has been a pleasure.
Well, thank you so much. But before we let y'all go, we have a quick game that we like to play with our guests. So we have a couple of Bronx questions that we like to ask our guests just to kind of see what are the things in the Bronx that they love. So Jason and I, we know what we love about the Bronx, but we're going to find out a little bit about what y'all love about the Bronx. All right. So 3 questions. They're really quick. First question. So let's say you had a friend who had never been to the Bronx before and they wanted to eat somewhere in the Bronx. Where are you taking them?
I'm taking them to a place called Hochi Milko. It's right near the Bronx Documentary Center, the Melrose area. It is the most unbelievable, authentic, delicious, fresh food from Mexico that you've ever had. Xochimilco is my spot. And actually, everybody makes fun of me because I order it for lunch probably 4 times a week.
That's good. That's good. There's so over of Tremont, there's a just a simple place there that serves just one of the great rotisserie chickens that you can possibly imagine, and right off of Tremont and Jerome, and I think I'd start right there. I'm a chicken freak, so that's where I'm starting right there.
Very cool. And the last Bronx question we got for y'all. So a lot of times we hear all these negative stereotypes about the Bronx, hence the reason why this podcast even exists, right? So what is one negative stereotype about the Bronx that you want to squash today for the people listening to our show?
So, I mean, I think the thing that you hear endlessly about the Bronx is it's like all these things about like that generally have centered the word fear. Right, like be afraid of the streets, be afraid of it, like on and on. And like the Bronx is filled with so much love, man. It's filled with so much passion. It's filled with so much light. It's filled with like an endless invitation to participate in the magic and the majesty of the people of the Bronx. And it's like whether it be the music, whether it be, I mean, any number of like summer nights, and like when COVID was happening and like the streets that were closed down and community was built and music came out and dance and just the convening of community and neighborhoods that are vibrant and alive with a richness and a tapestry of people from around the world. And so that fear, I've never felt it. I've just felt a love and an endless invitation into the magic and majesty of the Bronx.
So there's 2 things that I would like to, stories that are told that should be flipped on their head a little bit. One is, this idea that the Bronx, you never see in movies the Bronx. The Melrose, Nostradamus is this incredible organization in the Melrose area. They have all these community gardens that are some of the most incredible places to hang out. There's a garden named after my son that was built in collaboration with, I had a son who passed away about 20 years ago, and one of our partners helped us build a 20,000-foot mosaic garden called the Hayden Lord Park, modeled after Gaudi. And it's the story itself is the story of collaboration and community and people loving each other and the ripple effects of that a soul can have when people come together. And it's one of my favorite places in the Bronx. It's a beautiful place, and it's just emblematic of stuff that people need to hunt out, those places, And the other is, I think people know this, but it's important to underscore just the humor. You think about you guys, you think about, the 2 of you going back and forth, I'm sure. And you think about Jesus and Mero, and you think about, just the exchanges you have with the folks you work with. And, let's highlight that because it's one of the things that just, keeps you going and certainly makes you laugh. So
For sure.
Those are my 2 things.
Well, thank you so much, gentlemen. Thank you. This was super dope. So for the people listening, if people want to get in tune with DreamYard, the foundation, can you throw out your social medias? How can they get involved? How can they follow you?
Okay, you jump to our website at DreamYard.com, and there's links to all of our social media there, and partake in the community. There's an endless series of invitations to participate in any number of community events that we have the privilege of being a part of.
Very cool. And Jason, if you could throw out our social media really quick.
Yes, you can follow Live from the Bronx across all platforms at Live from the Bronx. That includes YouTube. We will be streaming on BronxNet every other Monday at 9:30 p.m. Look at our Instagram, Live from the Bronx, to stay up to date with when that'll be happening and everything else. So, and also, quick plug-in, check out our website, www.livefromthebronx.com.
This was so fun. It was really great to see you guys. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. It was a pleasure.
We did it, y'all.